It is a delight and a joy to see you all. Welcome. These little meetings, as I've called them, CommuniZooms, you know, they're just here really to help us cheer each other on our way and remind ourselves of our skills and the tools that we have, that sometimes when times are a bit hard, we can forget what we know. So I'm here to remind you how much you know and how resourceful and skillful you are with your NLP training. And I want us also to keep as well as we can, to be able to stay capable and resilient, to be able to help others, and to every day really be a conscious part of how we are going to build back our world in a way that we want to. Because I think this has given us a time to stop and pause and think about what we really do want in our lives, and that we can be part of that change. I also want to say, which I say every week, I know that people are in coming from very different places. And so some people are chipper and cheerful. Some people are, you know, anxious or depressed or even grieving and bereaved or even recovering from the illness. So I just hope that things that I'm saying are of help. Some things are of help to everyone who comes, wherever your starting place is. So today's topic is relationships and communication, or is it communication and relationships? Because each really is composed of the other. Communications is composed of relationships. Relationships are composed of communication. They create each other, and they're fundamentally kind of entwined and entangled with each other. And the main source that I'm going to be really based on is, I don't know whether in NLP you've read this wonderful book called The Pragmatics of Human Communication. The Pragmatics of Human Communication, which is dedicated to Gregory Bateson. And this is the part of our field that comes down the line. It's by Paul Vaslovic, Janet Bevan-Bavalas, and Don Jackson. A study of interactional patterns, pathologies, and paradoxes. Well, we're only going to get as far as patterns. Maybe another time, if we're all still at home, we'll get on to more about paradoxes. But for now, and this is really the book that, anyway, a lot of research in the Palo Alto group in the 50s and 60s about what really is communication. How can we even talk about such a multifaceted, living kind of experience? Because, you know, if you denominalize communication, you're communicating something to someone. Relationship, you're relating. These processes are how you're relating with someone in a certain way to communicate something. And of course, there's two in communication. We often sort of say there's like in the Pragmatics of Human Communication, they call it report and command. We tend to call it message and meta-message. So in other words, there's the content, there's the information about like the what, and then there's the how that is communicated, which is a set of messages about the relationship that you're in and about the relationship in which you're communicating. And so when they say there's, that it's report and command. Very interesting. So there's a report, and then there's a message about what we want the other person to be doing and how we want them to respond in some way. So I think this starts to work with our very dynamic interactional view of communication. Again, there was something I was reading in that book yesterday that said, what's interesting is in good communication in a relationship, there's more communication and less relationship message in a way. And the more there are difficulties in the relationship, the more the communication is about the relationship. There's a great quote in Steve Andreas's book that says, how do you know when couples therapy is over? And I can't remember the exact quote and I haven't got it with me, but it says, when one person asks for a cup of coffee, or they say something like the coffee's cold or something like that, and they both know that they're only talking about the coffee. There's no kind of side issues that are being kind of dredged up about anything, that are being conveyed through an apparently innocent request or an innocent remark, that it is just purely about the thing that is being said. So, so we have these messages and meta messages. There's a lovely quote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of this, and then we'll do some exercises and some questions for you towards the end. But I did want you to read this book to read from this book that I have not read, although I've read some of it, by Karen Barad, to bring us up to date. She's a particle physicist and a theoretical physicist at Santa Cruz University, unbelievably. And this is how she begins the preface to this book called Meeting the Universe Halfway. She says, this book is about entanglements. To be entangled is not simply to be intertwined with another, as in the joining of separate entities, but to lack an independent, self-contained existence. Existence is not an individual affair. What a great sentence. Existence is not an individual affair. Individuals do not pre-exist their interactions. Rather, individuals emerge through and as part of their entangled intra-relating, which is not to say that emergence happens once and for all, as an event or as a process that takes place according to some external measure of space and time, but rather that time and space, like matter and meaning, come into existence, are iteratively reconfigured through each intra-action, making it impossible to differentiate in any absolute sense between creation and renewal, beginning and returning, continuity and discontinuity, here and there, past and future. So that may or may not be helpful to you. I love it. And it's what a great paragraph. It's like the entanglements, this kind of amazing, trying to capture what is that incredible, interactive, live nature of communication. So we tend in NLP to say we're all experts in communication. This is our thing, that we are professional communicators. And the process of modeling in our field and our work, the question that we're always asking through modeling is, what's the secret sauce? And then to pull out, you know, in a more simplified way, what works, what's effective, you know, and to draw principles, tools, and skills from a field like communication. So as I say, these ideas about the dynamic, interrelated aspects of communication were explicitly described by Bateson and this kind of pool of people who've been very influenced by cybernetics, and which is this kind of study of communication and behavior in living systems, that it's about living systems, it's about learning, it's about how environment shapes behavior and behavior shapes environment. And so I think the first thing that I want to like put out there is this idea there's always a context. And in NLP, we say behavior is only meaningful inside of the context in which it occurred. So in other words, there's a bigger field all the time around our communication that is used to make sense. And of course, one of the pathologies that or the problems in communication is when an utterance or an activity or a behavior becomes decontextualized. It becomes de-linked from the context in which from which it naturally kind of emerged. And anybody who's on Twitter will know the kind of gotchas, you know, as people trek back through, you know, 1,000 years of tweets and find something somebody said that was absolutely kind of terrible, but they like remove all the context markers, you know, so out of context, it's like this terrible thing that this person has said. So we're very used to moving our attention in and out of context. And obviously, at least one of the things that helps us often is to recontextualize, you know, how something got said and done, how some communication, what it was originally intended to respond to. And there's a lot of very interesting research about this. I'm sure you already know that. I think it's called attribution bias, but I may be wrong. I should have looked it up, where we have the tendency for ourselves to contextualize our own behavior very, you know, in a very sympathetic way, I might add. So we say, I shouted because I was tired and hungry. So in other words, there's the context. This is my terrible behavior, but it's understandable, isn't it? We tend to also, studies have shown, not be like this for other people's terrible behavior. We tend to say, you shouted because you are a terrible person. So we tend to come in towards other people in this very absolute, judgmental kind of way. And notice also that difference between behavior, contextualized behavior on my side, and absolutely moralistically judged behavior on the other side. So I think there's quite a lot of that goes on in communication in relationships, where we're maybe quick to judge another and more sympathetic to ourselves. And this relates to how we punctuate and contextualize, you know, our interactions. Punctuation means what's the frame that we put something in. Sometimes it's a time frame. So something that seems really sort of terrible inside of a short time frame becomes understandable in terms of a longer time frame, or in terms of number of iterations of something. Something is more or less understandable. But anyway, we're rather built so that we're rather wired to feel that whatever we do, we're all right. Apart from when we don't, apart from when we've got another type of pathology in which we're treating ourselves in that way, that we do something, you know, that does have a context around it, but we're going to judge ourselves in this highly critical, hostile, identity level way. So we can treat others, of course, we treat others like we treat ourselves, basically. But anyway, we'll get to some of that. So there are 5 basic kind of NLP type rules for relationship and communication. Oh, I better speed up. One is there's always a context. Secondly, we are always communicating. We're always communicating. We're always influencing, we're always learning, we're always receiving and sending. Even if we're sitting in the room not saying anything, that's a communication. The letter that we didn't send, the email that we didn't respond to, that too is a communication. You know, there's no such thing as a kind of no communication in a living system. There's always this kind of entanglement and interacting. I think that a third one is we're always sense making. We're always making meaning. This is what human beings do. We're always making things mean something. As Hamlet said, there's nothing good nor bad, but our thinking makes it so. So in other words, we're contributing meaning. Everything is basically kind of more or less neutral. It just happens. We're the ones that impose meaning and sense making and draw our own conclusions on what happens. So the same thing is happening in conversation and communication. And then we say in NLP, so that means the meaning, the actual meaning of your communication is what lands with the other person and the sense they make of it. So in other words, it's not what you intended to say, It's the meaning the other person made of it. That's the meaning. So technically speaking, you may have all kinds of great intentions in your communication, but it's how it lands in the other person and the sense they make of it that's going to determine the behaviors and the responses and the reactions that you then elicit from that person. So, and then the fifth one is, again, how we chunk and punctuate the ongoing flow of interactions, where we'll suddenly kind of punctuate it a certain way. We'll take a slice out of it and look at that independently outside of the kind of flow of interactive influence. So this is why at the core of NLP practice, we have a model of communication which requires you in the first instance to start thinking about what is the purpose of my communication? What's my goal? What is it I want to elicit more of, less of, from other people or from this and with this person? So rather than have a series of techniques or sort of chat up lines, we actually have kind of what's the goal I have? Then, and a whole load of questions that we have with that, as I say, what do you want them to receive? What do you want to, you know, what do you want for them to understand by this? And then you're going to have evidences, like how do I know they've received it in the way I meant it? You know, so I want this to be achieved through my communication. What am I going to look for to know whether I've got it right or not? And so we talk about having sensory acuity and being able to calibrate. So being able to sort of see what the other person's responses and reactions are on a kind of scale. So we start to know, have I been understood or not? Have I got the reaction I wanted or not? So there's this sort of dynamic feedback-driven model where then the onus is on you as the communicator. If it's your goal and you want to communicate something effectively and congruently, it's up to you then to have this as wide a possible range of ways of doing that, so that eventually you can kind of hit the spot, as it were. You can get that sweet spot of what you meant to elicit actually is the response that you got. And you can verify that in a kind of evidence-based kind of way in real time. So there's a lot of curiosity and live processing and, you know, a lot going on in communication. Obviously, you can have too much flexibility. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm willing to do absolutely everything in order to get my point across. You may not want to. You may very well have a, you know, a line you will draw in the sand. There are also problems of context. There are cultural problems where one thing that is friendly in one culture is not friendly in another culture. And so you're sort of persistently trying to send the message, I am friendly, and it's being received in a way that you did not intend it. So reading these meta messages, being able to vary your tone, your words, your the whole non-verbal part of what you're doing, and being able to sort of more and more and more learn through calibration, through paying attention, how the other person receives information from you and what you want to do about that. So there's some fairly sort of useful rules of thumb. In NLP, we say subtly mirroring somebody non-verbally and verbally can often be very helpful. First of all, because it allows your own mirror neurons to pick something up from that person, you know, to actually get something of what their experiences is going through your own somatic unconscious system, because we're looking to create rapport. And of course, the unconscious test for rapport is, you know, when you scratch their head, do they start scratching theirs? When you scratch your head, do they start scratching theirs? And I just noticed all the people who just did that, so thank you. So you're being present, you're being, you're being awake, you're noticing what's happening, you're looking to elicit more of what you want and less of what you don't want. You're not taking on board that you know, any particular rules other than this dynamic framework. And of course, in NLP, we've got lots and lots of tools. We've got meta model, Milton model, VAK language, we've got framing, we've got all this kind of non-verbal language, you know, of being able to move your own communication channels around. So you can use your voice, your body, your language in multiple varieties and of ways. So I'm just speeding up a bit now. So I'm going to blah, blah, blah. I'm going to move on from that because what I want to get into is this idea of relational loops. And this is especially interesting when you've got sort of stuck in communication with somebody. There's so much more to say. And now I realize I've written a 3-hour lesson to put into basically 20 minutes. So sorry about that. But anyway, I hope some of it's helpful to you, just to get you kind of thinking about, yeah, what do I want? How is my communication going? Am I eliciting the responses I want in the world? You know, if so, what do I want to adjust and what can I learn in order to be an effective communicator and a professional communicator? One of the, so I don't know whether you know, some of you will, because we used to do it on Practitioner, this idea of relational loops. And again, this comes from this early work in Bateson, looking at systems and how systems start to set up a kind of homeostatic balance with each other. And so this is particularly interesting if you're in a relationship that gets a bit stuck and keeps on kind of going around the same ground a lot. So, I mean, and the two that I'll mention are this idea of symmetrical loops and the idea of complementary loops. Symmetrical loops are when you and the other person are both doing the same, and you're just kind of eliciting and triggering that from each other. So, you know, I mean, this is in pathologies and problems. And so you're both being angry, or you're both not speaking, or you're, you know, it's like something's kind of gone wrong. And now you're producing these kind of mirroring type of responses. And I mean, the heartbreaking thing is that you can get stuck in one of these kind of problem type relational loops with somebody, and really neither of you are at your best. Neither of you are able to tap into, as it were, the full you. You're both reducing and being reduced by this communicational kind of interaction that you've set up. And what's very difficult is that quite often it's quite hard to step outside of it. The same thing with these complementary things, you know, one person shouting, the other person's sort of like not speaking, or, you know, one person is very strict about things and the other person is very lax about them, or, you know, I don't quite know, you've probably got your own things, but people are just functioning in what appear to be very different ways, but actually they're both stuck in only being in that sort of way with this person. And so again, you're not able to bring your full self to the interaction. You see this a lot because obviously a lot of couples get together because we're partly, you know, we've got a lot in common, you know, and we've got these really interesting differences. And, you know, the key is, how can we preserve the interestingness of the differences without us polarizing and becoming kind of stuck into our roles? Oh, you're like this and I'm like that. And so I'm keeping you in your role, you're keeping me in my role. But neither of us are actually really able to fully express the breadth and range and, you know, miraculous scope, you know, of who we can be, the possible, the field of potential of who we can be fully and completely. So I think that's very, very interesting. There's again more to say about this. Maybe this is one I should do again, but in terms of for yourselves, the questions would be, with my current communication, what behaviors and responses do I want to elicit more of? What responses and behaviors do I want to elicit less of? You know, with myself and with others. Yeah. And then in a situation where I start to feel kind of stuck in my communication with another person, to be able to go from first position in perceptual positions, what is it that I really want, to be able to switch to like second position, what's really going on for the other person, stepping into their shoes. So I've got some information, both sides of that loop. And then of course, to be able to step back into a kind of observer position. This is where that thing that, you know, Einstein says, whoever said it, you know, you can't solve a problem from inside the problem. The thing is, in a relationship that's where it's got stuck bits, with the communications got stuck, you're both in good faith often trying to solve it from inside of that stuck loop. And the only place you can really see is to be able to step outside and see what's happening, see the pattern, that you're both doing the same thing, or there's like a symmetrical loop, or you're both getting worse and worse and worse. So you've got this symmetrical escalation, like an arms race or something. Or you've got this kind of, you know, complementary, you do this and I do that and we're different, but it works. But that's gone out of whack. And now it's become more pathological, where we're stuck in opposition to each other. And the only way is to be able to kind of step back. So that would be, how can you like step back, step into first position, step into second position, and then step back. And from this new perspective outside of the loop, bring all of yourself, your resourceful, capable, competent self back together again, and step in and make a fresh start in relation to the kind of purposes and values that you have around relationship and communication. So I hope that was helpful. It may have sounded a bit abstract, but I'm sort of trying to convey like the complexity and the multi-leveledness of communication and relationship. And of course, it is the absolute utter joy, sustaining joy of life with other human beings, other living systems, you know, back and forth, growing, learning, changing, evolving together. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. I hope that's helpful. But also I want to say, I hope you all stay safe and well. You know, thank you for coming. It's lovely to see you all.